Welcome to the Property Funder podcast with me, your host, Michael Dean. You can block me or you can mute me on social media at property_funder. I'm here today with Emmanuel. Before we get speaking to Emmanuel, we've got a little bit of housekeeping that we need to do. First, we need to thank the show's sponsor, which is a company that I've also co-founded, ironically, called Avonmore Capital. Avonmore Capital is a development and bridging lender based in London, but lending all over England and Wales from projects from £250,000 to £15 million, predominantly in the residential and PBSA space. Avonmore actually closed last week its largest ever PBSA deal. So Avonmore has appetite for PBSA developments, particularly those of retrofits and conversion. So if you've got those to discuss with us, get in touch. But we also do bridging, development, refurbishment as well. Second bit of housekeeping is thank you to all of you who are tuning in. Now, many of you will be tuning in for the first time because, of course, you're desperate to hear about the life story and experience and wisdom of Emmanuel. For those of you who are repeat visitors or you've come back to us more than once, please can you hit the subscribe button, can you like us on YouTube, and can you give us a 5-star review so that more people can hear, see and experience the very inspiring and interesting experiences and wisdoms of great guests like Emmanuel, who we've got here today. Now, Emmanuel, thank you for your patience as I went through that slightly long diatribe. Could you tell us your full name, tell us the name of your business and what the business does?
Yeah, so my name is Immanuel Ezekiel. It's quite a difficult name to spell as well as pronounce. My company is called Broadwing Homes. We're a boutique developer, mainly in London and the home counties, building either new flats, houses, conversion work, refurbishment work. Typical plot sizes are 1 to 20. Typical GDV or gross development values between 2 and 10 million.
And Emmanuel, you've recently, we were just saying off camera, you've recently ventured into the world of TikTok. You're trying to increase your prominence on there. What's that all about? Why are you why are you trying to get down with the kids? And I say full disclosure, I too have recently bit the TikTok bullet.
So technology and social media is something that I think we all need to embrace to increase the awareness of what we do and how we help people and help our clients. So for me, besides Broadwing, I have quite a few other strings to my bow. I've written a couple of books, which we can probably talk about later, but that's really to help the engagement there, as well as attract people to the projects that we have, both in terms of sales and investors. So yeah, it's really quite important. People don't know you. Marketing is such a big thing these days that you have to make yourself aware, or people more aware of you on all the different platforms, and they all have a different kind of audience.
No, well, I completely agree with that. Do you think there's a benefit as well in having a greater, more prominent presence online? Let's say around trying to be more competitive for the acquiring of sites as well. So do you think that helps too in terms of getting more opportunities through the door from agents, and also when you're competing with other developers, do you think that might also help you get a bit more of an edge when you're submitting a bid?
I think it certainly helps your credibility the more visible that you are. Because everything is at everybody's fingertips now. So people will research you, lenders will research you, agents will research you to see that you can do and say what you do. So it's it doesn't really matter what you say anymore. It's really what they can find about you and your track record and your history. So it certainly has an impact in that sort of area for sure.
Yeah. How have you found the response to the sort of your increased online presence? So, have you had has it been entirely positive? Have you had any experiences with, say, trolls or people who are maybe a bit disingenuous in terms of how they followed up? Have there been any noteworthy or interesting experiences and outcomes that have come about through your increased public profile?
I would certainly say the vast majority, probably 90%, has been very positive. And I don't really mind the negative, because there's something to learn from the negative as well. So in terms of how you post, what you say, language is quite important, how you position yourself. And you know, all feedback is feedback. And sometimes people don't really understand the message, or I haven't conveyed the message correctly. So all feedback is good. We could learn from that. So I don't mind the negative comments every now and again.
And the decision to kind of increase your profile and get maybe a bit more active on social media, and I mean obviously I joke about people blocking and muting me on social media, but you know, as many people will know, I've been a big fan, a big proponent and beneficiary of social media for a long time. Was it an active decision on your part to go and be more active on social media, or and increase your public profile, or is that something that someone like a marketing agent or a PR marketing agency or a PR consultant had encouraged you to do and has been helping you with, or is it something you do yourself?
I wish I did have a marketing agent or PR agent that could actually do a lot of the stuff for me. So it's something that I've very slowly picked up. Technology and social media is not something that I'm really great at. So I've had to embrace it, take it on board, and start posting bit by bit to increase your social awareness. And it does take time, but you have to do it consistently. And I haven't been very consistent. That's what I'm trying to work on at the moment, is being consistent across all platforms.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge. I like to consider myself reasonably social media savvy, and I find it a particular challenge. But I know that there is a real value. I think the algorithms really value if you're posting on a daily basis, and actually having the discipline and carving out the time to do that posting. And I think that we, you know, obviously, you look like you're in mid to late 40s, Emmanuel. We can give a surprise to our audience when they actually find out your true age. But those of us that I suppose are not kind of older than a Gen Z, I think the Gen Zers, they sort of seem to have they seem to be second nature to them to post about what they're doing every second minute. But for the rest of us that sort of grew up in a time or lived in a time where smartphones were not part of our daily lives, and that, you know, the world did exist before the internet and social media, I think we have to be. I think it requires more of a cognitive load, because we actually have to think about it and we have to consciously do it. Whereas I think for younger people under the age of 30, it's almost like it's second nature to them, and they don't think twice about it. Do you find that that's one of the challenges, is that you're constantly having to think about it and actively carve out the time to do it?
100%. You actively have to think about it, carve up the time, create the content. And I think quite often we're self-critical of ourselves in terms of the message that we want to put out, and sometimes we don't put it out even though it's really great content or really informative. We can be overcritical of how we think people are going to respond to the message. So, you know, younger guys, they do it straight off the bat. They're so used to it, they've been grown up with it, where we're trying to adapt into a new way of marketing ourselves, you know, compared to the networking, the old-fashioned ways of actually doing stuff, which still is my preferred option.
I think the difference now, though, is that you can meet someone who you've known for many years, but you've had interactions with them on social media, and then when you actually meet them, you feel like, I think a lot of the barriers, you know, I think the ice is already broken when you meet these people, because you've had in some cases years of interactions on social media, and then actually when you meet in person, it's almost like meeting an old friend, even if you're only meeting someone for the first time. And that, for me, I think is one of the real benefits of it, is that you do demystify people to some extent. Now, of course, we have to accept that there is a veneer, isn't there, of social media, that people will often only share the good, and actually the bad and the ugly are sometimes kept out of view.
I would tend to agree with you. One of the things I've tried to do on my social media is be honest. So when projects haven't gone well, things haven't gone well, I've shared the good, the bad, and the indifferent. I think that's quite important, to be real. things don't always go the way you want it to go to. I don't know really very many projects that have ever gone according to plan, budget or time. Sometimes it goes really well and you make more money. You get the site to deliver even more than you expected. The values go up during the build, and sometimes it goes the other way at the same time. So I think being honest is really important in terms of saying it as it is, showing it how as it is, and I think people appreciate that.
I actually think you're entirely right. I think that to be successful on social media, and I far from cracked it. I think I probably got the best traction at the moment on LinkedIn of all the platforms. But I think authenticity is the key thing when it comes to social media, and I'm not sure I personally found that balance. I think I'm still a little bit reluctant to be as transparent about the bad as maybe I could be. And I think that's something that I personally feel like I need to work on.
Yeah, I did an article a couple of weeks ago with PPN magazine, and I called it "The Two Projects from Hell," and I really went through just how difficult those projects were to get over the line. Even though at the end we won an award for both projects, they were just very, very tricky projects all the way through. Almost anything that you think could have gone wrong did go wrong during those projects. Just one of those things. But having the ability to work it through, deliver it, to make sure that everybody got repaid is paramount, and people want to be able to see that. And I got more engagement from telling about the bad than I actually did from the good stuff that we do.
I think, first of all, I'm going to say that so many people are probably, so many developers, I imagine, probably experience exactly what you experience on a daily basis, and I think, because, like we said, there's so much sort of veneered, perfect. Look at me, look how wonderful my project is. There's the before and the after, but no one shows. A lot of people are a little bit reluctant to share the bit in the middle that is, as you say, the project from hell, the sort of the shit show, that the clusterfuck, call it what you will, right, if you excuse my French, but
100%.
But the and so I think people are like, thank the Lord, here's this super experienced, super successful developer, and he's experiencing exactly the same problems that I'm experiencing. But we have an audience of, I think our core audience is developers, aspiring entrepreneurs, and finance brokers, and a lot of those finance brokers also want to do their own developments too. Could you kind of spell out what you see, what you felt were the biggest issues of those projects from hell? Like what were the main problems, what were the main issues that you were experiencing, and maybe how you overcame them?
So sometimes the market conditions work completely against you. And we had those projects where everything worked against us simultaneously. So we bought the site. So the profit on cost, profit margin, profit on GDV was very healthy. But nobody could have thinks of first Brexit, then COVID, builders either going bust or dying on the project, having to refinance from one facility to another. So a project that should have taken 18 months, taking 36 months, and to make sure you have enough profit. So a lot of things during that period. I mean, I've just condensed that, but if you've got the profit margin in there, not to be overly leveraged or geared, allows the lender to work with you, gives them more comfort. But when you get over leveraged or over geared, or if you have what I call expensive finance when things go wrong, which is mezzanine finance or stretch finance, you're putting yourself in a difficult position. So trying to minimize risk and your costs is really very, very important. And we chose some award-winning builders. They weren't small companies, but just at that time, there were lots of builders that had just fell over.
And when we talk about builders that fell over, are we talking? I mean, how long ago are we talking about? Is this kind of during the COVID times or other times?
In the last 18 months.
In the last 18 months,
so
yeah.
when we were coming to yeah, so during COVID, we had a contractor that died. So if you can imagine having a contractor and all of his team, and you've got to get all your collateral warranties. You've got to get your lender comfortable with the new build that you take on board. You've got to go back out to tender. The original price that you had tendered is no longer the original price that you had tendered. So lots of difficulties during that sort of process. That's why the margins were very important.
Yeah, I guess I mean, you clearly had to have a lot of fat in that deal to be able to endure a doubling of your project duration, because although it's not a particularly large proportion of your costs when you have a development appraisal, doubling your project length means that you're effectively doubling your finance costs, and that, especially, and if that's aligned with, I suppose, a big rise in the interest rates as well, that you will have experienced, and I suppose probably what I'm going to say was the biggest expense, actually, the fact that you had to switch contractors, and so you had another set of OHPs and preliminaries and all the rest of it that comes with that, so that and they probably also had to reprice that to account for what was a period of very high construction cost inflation.
It was a combination of the both. So finance costs and construction or material and labour costs have both had a double whammy. If we didn't have the margin in there, and bear in mind the market also worked a little bit in our favour, because we did have an increase during that period of time. However, because the bill took longer than it should have done, we didn't get all the help to buy cells that we needed over the line. So there was different aspects, but we came out the other end. We was able to repay all the lenders, and we've retained about 9 of the units over 2 sites. So it worked out well. Yeah,
but I guess in those situations, it's the journey that you've got to go on, and but fortunately, I suppose because you bought the sites well, and I think that's the key thing. But we as a family just bought a commercial investment in Surrey. We bought it for nearly half what the vendor paid for it, so that's always a good sign. And and someone said to me when I talked about it on social media, and they said, well, what's your plan for it? And my response was, don't F it up, basically, because if you buy something well enough, a good enough price, you can absorb a lot more problems. When you're buying things close to the margins, your margin for error is so much less. How do you stay disciplined, Emmanuel, when you're appraising sites, when, let's say, traditionally a lot of sort of SME developers have got this mantra, haven't they, of they're buying one, they're building one, and they're selling one. But what happens if you get out of that rhythm and you find yourself where you aren't building one, or you're selling one but you're not building one, so you feel that pressure to get on site and buy something? How do you maintain the discipline and the rigor to not overpay for a development, and therefore, and because clearly the development land market, it's, even in the last 2 years, it's still been hyper competitive. It's not been easy to secure sites, and landowners, and I speak as a landowner, aren't going to give the sites away for nothing. So how do you maintain that rigor and that discipline and don't end up overpaying for things?
That's a really good question, and I'll answer it the best way I can. So all the sites that we buy are numbers led. If it doesn't meet the margin, we won't progress. However, we're very creative at working with agents and landowners to make the numbers work. So quite often a landowner expectations are much higher for their land than it should be. And the only way to give them more is for the deal to be structured differently. So where they leave, either they do a joint venture with us, and what we would have paid on interest on the land, we can pay them. And also, if they do a joint venture and when our loan to value is much lower, we can pay them percentage of profit. So they leave some of the money in to the back end of the deal. Because invariably, a lot of the projects aren't working. The only way you can do it is to become creative. So we do a lot of stuff with joint ventures, not only with vendors, we also do them with banks, where they've actually taken possession of a site to make it work for them. We'll structure a deal where we can actually do something along those sort of basis.
Yeah, and in fact, I think you had a look at something that we've sort of taken control back of a site or two. I know you sort of put forward some proposals on that. So yeah, I'm sort of familiar with how you look at things. What's your current view of the market, like in terms of the way you're looking at sites right now? Is your focus on that kind of repossession / receivership joint venture type arrangement? Is that where you're trying to do a lot of your business right now, or are you still looking at kind of sites which are a bit more free and clear?
No, I'm definitely doing a lot of more of the first, but the second sites, if we're looking at sites, if they're flats, it's got to be a very unique kind of scheme to be a flat. So it's got to have double external space. It's got to have its own external space and communal gardens as well. If it doesn't have that in London, it's very difficult to start selling them, and they need to be a reasonable size to start with. You've got to do something that's different to the marketplace. Flats are not selling that well. So we will look at houses. Houses typically between 5 and 800,000 are still a good marketplace to be in. But my preferred option is office to resi or conversion work, things that are airtight, watertight already. We have much more certainty of cost delivery. We haven't got the uncertainty of coming out the ground. So that's our preferred option right now.
Yeah, I've got to say that there was a recent change of the permitted development rules. So larger office buildings, when they come vacant, are now eligible. So you can go over 1,500 square meters in terms of getting permitted development rights. Have you seen an increase in the number of opportunities for PD conversions or office to residential conversions in the last in the last 3 months on the back of those changes?
There's definitely more opportunities. However, whenever new planning comes into place, all of a sudden the agents advise the owners that they can get more for the site. So they're pricing the office to resi as if it's already got planning, and not allowing the developer to, because there is still risk. And what people don't really understand, even with PD, unless you get your applications spot on, 40% of all PD applications are still being rejected.
Why are they being rejected, Emmanuel? What's the council's justification?
Because people still don't put in place what they need to do, but they shortcut the reports. There's additional reports that you have to put in as if it were a full application. If you want to get your PD within 50, you've got to give the council the opportunity to have all the information and not give them any reason to be able to turn it down. So a lot of inexperienced developers, people that are coming off of training courses, they think they've got the information they have, but they haven't. So PD, I was looking at one yesterday, a really lovely scheme in Hammersmith that could be anywhere between 8 and 11 units. But again, the vendor's expectation from the agent is much higher than what it should be. So you've got that negotiation process in terms of what they feel the value is and what the real value is.
Yeah, I mean, again, speaking as a landowner and owner of office buildings, yeah, I can, I sort of, I see both sides of it, particularly when I'm looking at on the funding side. But no, I think that's entirely right. We're actually about to make a PD application on a building that we've got in Staines, and you know, we're sort of almost looking at it. We're approaching it a bit like a full application. So one of the key things like flood risk assessments, fire risk. So there's requirements for additional staircases once you go over 18 meters. So making sure you've got that covered, highways, other environmental reports. I remember we owned a a business park near Reading, and we exchanged with a delayed completion with a PD developer. This is going back sort of 8 years ago, and their PD application was effectively taking old set of marketing particulars, drawing a red line around it, and going, "We're submitting this is a PD application." And I actually, the crazy thing is, I actually think I think they got it through anyway. But I know the councils are a lot more stringent now, and certainly tightening things up. And of course, we've got minimum space standards requirements very much remain in place. Did you ever get tempted to go for the sort of battery farm HMO, 150 square foot rooms in a PD conversion, or were you always quite focused on that, the good quality space standards and living arrangements?
Always on good quality space standards and arrangements, except for one building that we bought in Hendon, which we had a commercial tenant on the ground floor, which we still own, which is Domino's Pizzas. Above it was offices between accountant and lawyers, and we converted that into a typical HMO because that's what it lent it to. It didn't really lend it to flats, so that's the only one that we really did that kind of model.
Could you describe for people why the Domino's is a problem as it would be a problem to have converted that into more for sale units?
Well, on that particular unit, it would be very difficult. So you've got two different accesses. So you have Domino's on the main road as a range of different shops. And then on the side, there's a separate entrance to go up to the mews above it. And it's split with a concrete floor section between the two. So to actually convert that into one unit would be almost impossible. They effectively it should be on two titles, but they're on one. But it was, in terms of cash flow, extremely lucrative. So at the time, Domino's was 24,000 per annum. The offices being rented at 12, so it gave us about 36,000. We increased Domino's to 27,000 as part of the rent review, and the 7-bedroom HMO was 72,000, so just under 100 grand from 36,000. And we spent about 150,000 refurbishing the upper floors, and we didn't need to do anything to the Domino's. So it's a good covenant. So it was a very easy in and out.
Yeah, and I guess the other factor would have been to go for private sale, because you're above a takeaway. It's more difficult to get a owner occupier mortgage on that as well. So I suppose another constraint that would have acted against you. I've known you for, I'm going to say, about 5 or 6 years now. I think we first started our relationship, looking at financing a pub conversion down in southeast London. Would it be fair to say you probably have a bias still towards conversions over ground up for the reasons you stated? So the dangers of sort of coming out of the ground when it comes to new build?
I would say I definitely have a bias now, after doing a number of new build projects, just because of the amount of uncertainty that you have when you come out of the ground, weather conditions. Whereas if you're really airtight or watertight, you're minimizing the amount of risk that you're taking. So yeah, I'd say I'm more flexible or easy with the conversion works, because I do know what I'm doing, even though your contingency often has to be higher. So, when we did the pub conversion, contingency, we didn't put 10%, we put it 20%, and we used all of that.
Why would you need that? I mean, I as someone in the trade, or sort of in the trade, I can hazard a guess, but for our less experienced viewers and listeners, why would you need a bigger contingency for a conversion project?
Okay, so this was an old project, so it was an old building, and when you have an old building, you don't know what you're going to uncover or what you're going to find when you start stripping out. And when we stripped out the building, so part of the costs were, we increased the basement, which was effectively the beer keg for storage, to make it into a proper floor. So actually dig out So not only did we have to dig it out, we actually had to underpin it. We had to put various supports, we had to tank it. And as we went through the building, the chimney breast, the stairs, none of it could really be retained. So the additional costs, we had to take chimney breasts down. There was a lot of sort of design bits. There was rot in the timbers. So it was almost a full, complete strip out. And normally find the older the building, the more contingency you have to put in there. If it's not too old, then 10, 15% is fine, but we normally put in 20% as a contingency.
Well, I have personal experience of this. We acquired a couple of buildings in Essex for my father-in-law to put one of his dental practices in. We're going back sort of 15 years now, and these are sort of Victorian properties on a sort of high road style terrace, and essentially the building was absolutely knackered, and we had to do exactly what you did with the taking out the chimney breasts, and what should have been a suppose a sort of 20 grand getting it to Cat A, and then the fit out cost ended up being close to 100k in getting it back up to Cat A spec. So yeah, we see that firsthand. But I also think though that it's not just the old buildings as well. Even office to resi conversions. We had one of our first deals that we did at Avonmore, which is ironically in the same town as the business park that I've just bought. It was a 1970s building, and to create channels for the services for the apartments,
yeah,
they had to cut into the screed of the concrete of the floors. But the problem was that the type of cement / concrete that they had used to build the slabs was of a nature that they needed diamond drill cutters, yeah, to cut through the slab, and that created this enormous additional cost that wasn't budgeted for in the project. So it just goes to show that with these conversions, you're right, that in the experience that we have, we know that we know that in a lot of ways a refurb or a conversion, there are often kind of hidden pitfalls that you may not have appreciated. Like when you strip a wall back, you might find a nice mosaic, or you might find some nice flooring or whatever underneath when you rip up the lino, but you also might find some rotten floorboards and some joists that are about to condemn the building. So you just don't know, do you?
And there speaks the voice of experience, right? So
yeah,
they say good judgment counts for bad judgment, good experience counts for bad experience. And unless you've done you won't know those things. Because in a site, they can be very over optimistic in regards to GDV or build cost, rather than being realistic. And if it comes in lower, they're very happy. But a lot of people, I tend to find, when they do their spreadsheets, they undercost the cost of the works, and that's where they get stuck.
Yeah, and of course there's a temptation, isn't there? There's always and we've obviously talked about already the discipline that you need to have when you're running your appraisals. But people want to, developers want to buy sites. It's about you've got to resist that temptation to undercost the project, because speaking from a lender's perspective, when a project is undercosted, presented to us at Avonmore, and it's undercosted, immediately there's a loss of credibility even before we've had the opportunity to fully appraise the viability or the opportunity to lend. So consequent, and if it does slip through the net, you'll invariably have a quantity surveyor who's appointed by us, who will opine on those build costs, and ultimately that can have an impact on the amount of loan, or the amount of day one loan you have available to you, and therefore can restrict the amount that you can or increases the amount of non-senior debts that you're having to put into the structure. And then you potentially end up in the realms of as you described it, the expensive finance, the mezzanine lenders. You talked about experience. Probably a good opportunity now. It's a good segue to talk about how how did you end up in the property development game, Emmanuel? How did we get here?
It was a natural progression. So I started, like most people, as a typical buy-to-let investor, buying buy-to-let properties, but I couldn't get my money out as quickly as I wanted to in the olden days. So then I started doing some basic refurbs. Then I went from converting 1 beds into 2 beds, 2 beds into 3 beds. I then went a bit bigger. I went splitting houses in from 1 house into 3 flats. I then started in the olden days, the old office to resi before it was PD. I converted a building in St Albans from an office to 6 flats. Then started getting into new build and doing a combination of either conversion work, new build, or refurbishment work. Bought sites wherever we could actually make them viable. So bought sites in Towcester, in Hatfield, Lewisham, London, Tottenham, Finchley, Barnet, Hampstead, just various places that we could actually make the sites work. So it's been a natural progression over a period of time.
And I mean, while you were a buy-to-let investor, at the beginning of it, what did you have a different career? Was there a different industry you were working in before you were in property?
Yeah.
I presume it was.
Yeah, I had a few. So I started life on a building site as a heating and ventilating engineer. I did a 4-year apprenticeship. At the time, it was the Felton Borstal new wing that was being built. And that's where I cut my teeth in learning my skills as a heating and ventilating engineer. Having said that, so my 4-year apprenticeship, and gas and arc welding as well. I mustn't forget that as well. When I finished that, I decided literally the same day I finished my apprenticeship that I wouldn't work on a building site again. And then I got into a company called Harp Heating that was selling central heating. So I knew about the heating, started selling. So it became quite clear that I was good with people. I understood the product. I believed in the product. So I did that for a few years. I then got recruited by another company in sales called Sharp's Bedrooms, which you might have heard about. After a couple of years, they wanted to expand into Europe. They needed some franchisees. They asked me if I'd become a franchisee. I took over one of their stores in Finchley. The first year was the turnover they were doing was 200,000. In the first year, I took it over to over $1 million turnover. And it became quite apparent very quickly they wanted to take the franchise back from me. But that lasted for a very, very lucrative 10-year period. I did very well out of it. I hope they did very well out of it. And towards the end, I got recruited by another company that was coming to the UK that was in mortgages. And the mortgages at the time were very different to what they are now. So mortgages going back quite a few years were interest calculated annually in arrears. This company was doing interest daily and had a current account mortgage linked to it. So that company then was called First Active Mortgages. That company today is called Virgin Money. But the difference and the impact of that particular mortgage was the catalyst for all mortgages in the UK to change. And there was a plethora at the time of different companies that started to do very similar things that were unique. So besides First Active, you had Woolwich, Barclays, Intelligent Finance, Woolwich, all had different either current account or offset mortgages. But First Active at the time had a unique calculator to show the benefits of how to manipulate your finances. So I became more or less the authority on that calculator worldwide. We're showing people how to pay off the mortgage anywhere between 1 and 7 years earlier, saving between 25 and 50,000 pounds worth of interest. So that and understanding mortgages in a lot of detail. So having the mortgage company, I had 50 brokers, 100 staff. So having the mortgage company combined with understanding now property and buying property and refinancing property then became very easy. At the time, self-cert mortgages, it was just a fantastic time to be in property and finance, and that really just poured rocket fuel on the buy-to-let portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways, you know, the entire variety of your experiences it's sort of inevitable. You ended up going down the development route, and just having the site experience that you know, I guess it would be the Feltham Young Offenders Institute. Would it be called that now?
It is.
Doing all the you know, doing the heating and ventilation there, you know, the gas side of it, you know, installing the furniture with sharps. You know, that's perfect, isn't it, for getting into the refurbs, and you've got that the mortgage background as well, which then enabled you to kind of churn your portfolio and grow it, get the cash out and go again. And so yeah, it all makes perfect sense that you ended up there. In terms of the developments that you're doing now, obviously you've amassed a lot of experience on the construction side, and I can also understand particularly maybe why you have a slight preference for conversions. But are you doing the construction yourself? Are you sort of a self builder, or do you engage with third party contractors as a preference? Obviously, you talked about the sites from hell, where you had not one but two contractors, including the late contractor, shall we say?
So I think lenders in the past would preferred you to have a main contractor, but in reality, a main contractor gives the lender or the developer no real protection at the end of the day. So in terms of managing the sites better, we now procure the different packages out. It gives us far more control in terms of quality and in terms of cost. So we act as the main contractor of very sub it out. Now that we've got the experience, the expertise, and shown that we can deliver sites where contractors have actually gone bust, we've gained a lot of credibility in that area.
I actually would say that I would agree with I sort of agree with the new prevailing wisdom around contractor versus self-build, in that I think a lot of lenders have historically taken too much comfort from that fixed price JCT contract. But the reality is, I mean, you only need to look at a company like Carillion, which collapsed a few years ago, which was an enormous company. And I think that at the end of the day, many contractors have a habit of churning and burning, don't they? They set up their companies. They enter into fixed price JCTs. They overextend themselves. They overcommit. They commit to fixed price contracts that are way below the deliverable value of the scheme. They run out of money. They torch the company, and then they phoenix the next day, with a different name. So actually, as it stands, I'm now very much wedded, or very much a fan of developers having, if they've got the experience, or if they've got the experience, or if they don't, with a PM, actually, like you said, tendering individual packages or doing it all themselves in-house.
You've got to have a very good project manager. So if you've got a really good project manager, also now with materials, procuring them yourself can make a massive saving in that regard. So breaking up the packages between the labour and the materials could have a massive saving and control.
I mean, what do you see the biggest challenges for you and your business over the next 12 to 18 months? Specifically, I mean, is it still construction related, or is it sales, or where do you see the big sort of the traps?
So I think construction is now leveled out. As you know, I'm also connected quite heavily with Trusted Land, and we had a meeting this Thursday with developers, architects, just seeing what's happening in the marketplace. And we are seeing now contractors now knocking on our door rather than us knocking on their door. So contractors now searching for business. So prices have started to materials a bit more sort of stable, and build costs, although coming down significantly, they're not as high as they were. So build costs for houses, I'd say, probably are still around 250 a square foot. Flats, I'd say anywhere between 250 and 300 a square foot. But they were creeping further than that in some sort of locations in areas. So you might get a new build for houses at 225 with a timber frame, but traditional, you're still looking sort of 250 or so. So I think the build costs have stabled out. It's acquiring the site at the right value and making the assessment and not overvaluing the GDV, and making sure you have that margin. So we're working on higher margins now. So
Yeah.
we want to be working on 25% of cost, 20% of GDV as a bare minimum. And ideally, we would like to retain the site. So if we got that 25% in there, we know that we can exit and keep the units, or sell one or two and very easily refinance and keep them. So we're building more fat into it because of the amount of risk. Most people don't appreciate for small SMEs, all the profit really is in the last couple of units. The huge amount of risk that you take, you want to have that certainty. So we're going more for self-build and retain, and that's a lot of the developers are now, a lot of the SMEs, to make it really viable, to minimise the risk and not have those end costs, are trying to keep sites, if not all of it, partially.
Do you think we're in a bit of a Goldilocks phase now, around, in terms of as a developer? And I'd be quite happy for you to challenge me on this. Based on the conversations that I'm having, I sort of feel like there's a sort of the next 12 to 18 months is a bit of a Goldilocks phase, because like you said, construction costs are stabilizing, if not coming down. We're going into a softening interest rate environment. Because of the difficulty over the last 2 years, really, well, let's call it 18 months, certainly since the Liz Truss kamikaze budget, we've seen obviously a big drop in starts on site, which obviously explains why the contractors are now knocking on your door, because planning has been a nightmare to obtain, and I can say that firsthand with my own personal experience. So planning is a nightmare. So there's no new sites coming through the planning system, and then because we sort of had this perfect storm last year of high interest rates, low sales velocities, blah blah blah, house builders have not been bringing new supply into the market, so you've got a restriction on supply of new product coming through. So that means you've got softening interest rates, no new supply coming through, construction costs being cheap, likely GDVs are going to outperform your initial appraisals. That to me feels like a bit of a Goldilocks scenario. And as a funder, obviously I'm lending 70% of that finished value as well. As a funder, I'm thinking this is a green light moment. Do you see it the same way, or have I missed something?
No, very much the case, provided you acquire at the right price. It's all about acquiring at the right price and making sure you got the margins, not being highly geared. And you're right, it's the timing, if you've got the right site, especially if it's a PD. But if you've got nothing to come out of the ground, very easy. If you have got something out the ground and you can discharge those conditions quickly, because some conditions are still quite onerous. If you haven't got any roads or other infrastructure, then yeah, those sites, especially houses are hot right now. They really are.
Yeah, I think particularly for housing, that price point you talked about, that sort of 500 to 800,000, particularly in sort of, I mean, gosh, if you can find a house in anywhere near London for £500,000, then good luck to you. But obviously that's still, once upon a time, £800,000 house was anything but affordable. But now, just I guess that's the passage of time. £800,000 in inside the M25 or around the M25 actually is, it's sort of par for the course, isn't it? But you can understand why it's a it's that sort of second stepper market. You're not dealing with first time buyers. There's been a lot of talk about these 99% mortgages, which are sort of guaranteed or backed by the government. Do you think that's necessary to kickstart that first time buyer market?
It's a difficult question to answer properly, because when you give the 99% mortgage, what it will do will have a knock-on effect on the values, and you want to really create some stability in the marketplace. So getting first-time buyers into the marketplace is certainly a good idea, but with the 99%, it will have a knock-on effect, same as the Help to Buy, to inflate the first-time buyers. You want the market to grow steadily and not have, you know, these big rushes. So yes, it will definitely fuel the marketplace. If somebody will come up with 1%, it's going to make it much easier for them. And if that 1% is available for all kinds of properties, it will certainly start fueling the market. And once the first time buyer market starts to increase, we know the knock-on effect will happen right across the board.
Yeah, I mean, those of us that have been in the industry as long enough, and obviously you've been in longer than I have, that it's continually a source of frustration for me that governments, although we've obviously had 14 years of a Tory government or Tory-led government, not exactly the world's greatest when it comes to planning and new supply. Lots of, you know, very NIMBYistic approach. But I think, yeah, if you want to get first-time buyers onto the market, surely the solution is actually investing in the planning system so that more stock, more supply can come through. I think it's I don't know if you share the same view. This constant market manipulation with Help to Buy, this 99% mortgages, stamp duty cut, stamp duty holidays. It just creates these sort of peaks and troughs, doesn't it? And no one really knows where they stand.
I agree, because you don't have any real certainty, and you've got windows. You've got to operate within windows to take advantage of it. Where if you have more certainty, it just creates more calmness within the marketplace.
But it's even things like when the government imposed the 1,500 square meter restriction on PD conversions, immediately you've taken you've taken the biggest derelict office buildings out of the PD market, and of course landowners, landowners having to, there's one thing going through PD, it's a completely different thing having to go through full planning, and it's a break right now, based on my own experiences, and will continue to do so. But you have to be very brave and very experienced and very knowledgeable to go for a full planning application on any site. And so, but the government, I think, really shot themselves in the foot from a supply side by imposing that 1,500 meter restriction, and thankfully they've obviously removed that. But for me, it was a really stupid thing that they did.
Yeah, I agree totally with that sentiment. You know, planning. I've got a few applications in planning. I cannot tell you how long it's taken and how much it's actually cost us in additional reports, and just how incompetent the system is right now.
Yeah, we will not bore our audience with too many war stories about that. We'll have to save those for round two, Emmanuel. But in terms of the portfolio size, it sounds like you're quite keen to retain units once you've got them, and certainly I think I'm starting to come around to that way of thinking. I think when the earlier part of my career as a property investor, I was much more of a trader. And now I think I've sort of pivoted now towards, and that's across all of my business dealings. I think once you've got a bit of money, and once you've kind of, you've got yourself a bit settled, you don't need your requirements change a little bit, of course. And I think some of the trading is a bit necessity based. But what sort of portfolio size are you now dealing with in terms of what you've retained? I mean, how many units are we, to the sort of nearest dozen are we talking about?
Well, on every scheme, I try and keep between 2 and 6 units. And our average schemes, as I said, anywhere between, well, the average scheme is between sort of 5 and 15. So over the years, with obviously I've sold stuff, I've had different joint ventures and partnerships. So 60 odd, 70, something
Yeah.
like that.
And obviously these are going to be dotted all around sort of the M25 area. How do you find the management of those units? I mean, do you have someone internally, someone in-house who manages all of the rental properties, or do you use external managers for those?
No, I have an internal manager. She's been with me for over 20 years. She was my PA at the mortgage business, and she's just carried on looking after the portfolio. Obviously, we use agents and stuff like that, but in terms of her understanding the portfolio, she's great at what she does. She looks after the portfolio, makes it much easier for me.
Yeah, and in terms of your wider team, because one of the questions that's been not nagging at me, but I wanted to know how many developments can Broadwing manage at any one time, and what's the team look like, the internal and external team look like for the management of that?
So we can handle between 3 and 5 reasonable size projects at any given time. And they don't, ideally not all starting at the same time, but between 3 and 5 sort of projects. We have our project manager, which Tom Boraleski, has been in construction a very long time, both in Poland, Portugal, Germany, here. And then we use, in addition to our project manager, Tom will use a contract administrator. Won't use them for more than 2 sites at a time. And that's the way that we keep the actual cost. And then we outsource everything else. That keeps us lean, more efficient. Architects, surveyors, M&E consultants all have to be localized to where you actually want to do the project. So we're quite lean inside. The company only consists of 3 directors, and the rest of it is mainly outsourced.
Yeah, because I think when you're less lean and you've got too many employees, I think that probably is when you fall into that trap, that churn trap, where you feel like you aren't able to maintain that discipline around profit margins in the schemes, and you're almost, there are plenty of people who will, I'm sure, naturally outcompete you for sites who will buy on margin because they need to keep the teams going. And one of the things that I was thinking about is it's interesting that you kind of have a good sense of the maximum number of schemes that you can have running at any one time. I think back to one of the developments I was telling you about in the Surrey town, where they had to cut they had to do the diamond cutting of the screed there. That was owned by a developer, which was run by 2 young guys. It's sort of basically, they started their lives as hod carriers, and fast forward 5-10 years later, they're driving Audi R8, leased Audi R8s, and living in Pan Peninsula in Canary Wharf. But I think they bit off more than they could chew, and they ended up taking on, I think, too many and too large, mainly PD projects. They had a little bit of success, and then I think they tried to run before they could walk. And then,
I know exactly who that is. and but they came to me for joint venture funding, and I looked at their team and what they were doing, and I ran a mile.
Well, yeah, and I think one of those individuals has now run. They have also run themselves, and they are no longer in the country for legal reasons, I believe. But we won't name them to protect ourselves legally as well.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's quite instructive though, that, I mean, I'm sure you probably found that too, that they, rather than focusing on the delivery of what they had and maximizing the value of what they had, it's almost like they sort of sought almost a degree of megalomania, didn't they? And I think that's a trap that developers who experience a little bit of success, that they mustn't chase success they mustn't just chase the buck every single time. That you've got to actually get the thing that you're working on finished, sell it, and then move on, rather than trying to try and buy everything and take over the world. But it's funny that we both had that experience with these individuals. But
Yeah,
fortunately, we did quite well out of that particular loan. But that project was very much bailed out by the equity investors that those two individuals had used. And yeah, I think those equity investors are feeling once bitten, twice shy now about getting involved in property development,
yeah.
understandably. Speaking about equity investors, that obviously, because you like to have well capitalized development schemes, presumably then you like to do joint ventures with equity providers who will give you that extra bit of capital and leverage, but also patient capital to sit alongside more traditional, less expensive development finance. Can you talk people through a little bit how you go about sourcing those people and what you're looking for and what they're looking for, and why you're able to make it work?
Yeah, so ideally, I prefer to work with people that are non-property people. The main reason for that, people that are in property know too much, want too much. Whereas you've got somebody who's a high net worth client, sophisticated investor, or they have their own SaaS, they are more realistic in terms of returns. They're able to hold their funds with you for a period of time, and you can give them really substantial returns. So, typically when the market was before the last couple of years, we would give an investor anywhere between, if they wanted a coupon on their money, anywhere between 8 and 15%, whereas a JV partner can get anywhere between 25 and 50% of the actual profit, depending what they put in. So it's very lucrative for them. It means that we can gear less, our costs are less, and we can still acquire sites. And when you joint venture, you don't just joint venture just with the equity partner, you joint venture with the rest of their team. So you can actually leverage not only their skills, but at the same time. So one of the reasons we're being able to grow is through that joint venture partnership, is the ability to tap into their resources, their team, their infrastructure. Because not every joint venture partner will just want money. They want to be part of the actual project as well. So you both learn and at the same time.
And are you meeting a lot of these people through kind of you mentioned PPN? Is that one of the, you've got people who obviously want to get into property and but don't have the experience? Is that one of the routes that you're able to meet some of these people, or is it coming, do the equity investors come from different sources?
They come from all different sources. Sometimes they get them from mortgage brokers. Sometimes they get from equity funders or family offices, or from my LinkedIn profile. A lot of the stuff I do on the professional side is sort of LinkedIn, and those are the people that I ideally like to work with. I work with a lot of doctors, accountants, solicitors, professionals that have quite a lot of surplus cash, but they don't have the time or the knowledge, and those are the people that I do ideally like to work with.
Sometimes do those investors, they say, well, actually, I don't want to. I'd like to, rather than taking a share of the profits, I'd actually like X number of units of the scheme, and that's their sort of JV profit. Is that one of the ways that you address that side of things?
Very much so. So we look at the scheme and we look at what's the most tax efficient way for them to get their money back. So that's a very good way for investors to actually get an acquisition without having to pay any tax as well. So yes, that's something that we do. We work alongside tax specialists to help them structure it accordingly.
A lot of your peers have delved into sort of the fund management and created their own funds, or they've had partnerships with private equity funds. Is one of the reasons you've chosen maybe not to go down the route is that you then, in doing so, you feel a sort of pressure to go out and buy, and therefore you aren't then able to get have the discipline, the purchasing discipline that you obviously has served you so well, or are there other reasons why you haven't followed that route?
I don't think I've been lucky enough to secure successfully the correct family office for a continuous basis, because if I did, having, it doesn't matter how much money you have, if you use your own, you're going to run out of it. it's having that partnership. And offices change all the time. You know, as the market conditions change, one family office will have an appetite today, they want tomorrow. So it's having that consistency to know that when you go and put a bid in, that you know you've got the funds behind you. So I'll work with funds that I know that are available there and then, and I'll go out and source a project accordingly.
Well, that's very interesting, and I'm sure those of our listeners who you know, that maybe want to get into property or would like to talk to you about your next project, I'm sure we'll reach out to you afterwards, and we'll obviously provide your contact details accordingly. You mentioned books and you mentioned trusted land. What are your, I suppose, outside of Broadwing, what are the various interests that you've got, and things that you've got going on?
So I have buy-to-let the different continue. They're all SPVs anyway, so if we retain them, we're all in separate SPV units. I do my public speaking on various bits to do with mindset, property. I have written 2 books. The first book was called The 6 Steps to Financial Freedom, and that was designed to help anybody get out of debt. What I found with the mortgage company is, although that we would help people every 2 or 3 years consolidate their debt, they would come back 2 or 3 years later with just more debt. And I thought this was crazy. Nobody's teaching people how to manage their finances. So I created a formula to show people how to get out of all their debt, including the mortgage, without having to earn any more money. And that book is endorsed by people called Brian Tracy, I'm sure you've heard,
Yeah.
and the late Bill Bartman, USA Billionaire Entrepreneur of the Year twice. And that's had some fantastic reviews over the years since I've written the book. And it really was to help people understand how compound interest works against them. Most people don't realize how mortgages work, and to get out of debt. And especially when you think that if somebody takes a car loan for 3 or 4 years, and then all of a sudden they consolidate into a mortgage, where they didn't take a 20-year mortgage in the first place for a car, why are they doing it now? So I taught people and set up systems to allow them to pay all their debt off. So typically, in a nutshell, if somebody had, you know, a mortgage, car loan, bank loan, various loans that were paying £1,500 a month in total, when we consolidated it, it would have come down to something like 700 or 800. It created a surplus. Instead of that surplus being in their pocket, we created that as an overpayment to accelerate the debt down. So they would pay off their mortgage very, very quickly. And that was just one of the actual formulas. The second book, which I've just written with my co-author, Julie Hogbin, is called Wealth Beyond Money. And that book is about balance. So the first and foremost is your health. Your health is your wealth. And it's not just your physical health, it's your emotional health, mental health. The second part is your relationships. The most important relationship you ever have is the one with yourself. And very few people have a very good relationship with themselves. Then you've got relationship with business partners, associates, loved ones, intimate relationships. And then last but not least is money. Money is the icing on the cake. It certainly helps, but you do need to have good health, good relationships to enjoy your money.
Well, I think those books, well, they sound fascinating, and I'm sure will be very additive to our.
I'm not sure if you can see it from there, but with the blackout screen.
What we'll do is we'll share links to both of those books in the show notes afterwards, so that our audience can benefit from them, because they certainly, the nature of our audience being what they are, I think they'd be very curious, and it would very much fit what they're interested in. I guess we're going to sort of start to sort of wind down now and start to go into sort of the what we usually talk about towards the back end of the show, which is to talk about your lifestyle and lifestyle and things that make you tick. For those of the audience who don't follow Emmanuel on social media, probably about maybe 18 months ago, 2 years ago, Emmanuel shared some photos of himself on Instagram, looking very shredded, full 6-pack. Which considering, I think are you now 61, 62 now, and I think at the time you were 60 when you shared those photos.
I'll be 16 62 in 2 weeks. Yeah.
62 in 2 weeks. I mean, so Emmanuel Emmanuel is living proof that there are no excuses, whatever age you are, to get yourself in your best physical shape. Obviously, physical training, that's important to you. What are the other things that you do to kind of keep yourself on the straight and narrow, Emmanuel? You know, what helps you? What helps make you tick?
Well, exercise is really important for me. So I start every day with exercise from 7 to 9, 6 days a week, typically. Even when I go away, that's how I start my day. That's the foundation. Then nutrition. So nutrition is really important. How you fuel your body, how you fuel your mind is really important. So it keeps your energy high, keeps you positive. Yeah, exercise and energy and nutrition are the two important things. And then relationships. You know, I have a great relationship. I also like to party quite a lot. I do a lot of festivals, go to Ibiza and other bits quite often. So most of the stuff that I do is outside, you know, back to nature, enjoy the sun, just have balance. It really is about having balance. And that's one of the reasons why we wrote the book.
Well, as someone who's sort of more recently embracing that the health and well-being, health and wellness, and I've rediscovered the gym, rediscovered lifting weights. I think you and I probably should go to the gym one time together. I think that'll be a nice thing for us to do.
Love it.
Yeah, I can absolutely resonate with that. In terms of like a lot of recent guests have actually talked about their relationship with alcohol and the decision to give it up or cut it back. Do you drink? Do you not drink? You know, or are you somewhere in between?
I do drink. I don't drink very much, but I'm a social drinker. So I'll drink maybe on the weekends, 1 or 2 drinks, and that's all I really need. It's really to be social.
And then in terms of diet, are there anything particular do's and don'ts that you know, things that any particular things you do? Do you do intermittent fasting, kind of paleo, vegan, carnivore, or you just kind of just eat sensibly?
No, I do the intermittent fasting. That actually works quite well. Typically finish eating 6 or 8 o'clock. Don't normally eat till 12 or 1 o'clock the next day. That works quite well, especially when you're working and going to the gym. You don't actually miss it.
No.
So as long as you have your water and your coffee, that's fine. Most of my food is either meat, chicken, fish, salads. In terms of, you know, people say, do you eat carbs? I do eat carbs. But I have good carbs like potato, sweet potato, white potato, rice. Bread doesn't really do very much for you, or pasta. No real value to it. So if I'm gonna do something, I might as well have something that's gonna be filling and nutritious at the same time.
Well, I think that's very good guidance, very good advice, and something that, although imperfectly, I'm very much trying to very much trying to replicate as well. So interesting that that's what you're doing. And look, I think the proof of the pudding is very much in your in how you look at, you know, you look magnificent for a man of your vintage, and hopefully you continue in that form. You mentioned Brian Tracy. I mean, who are the big sort of mentors or big influences in your life that you might point to? You know, have there been any people kind of your sort of your quote unquote rabbi that's helped you kind of get to where get to where you are? A lot of people talk about their parents, for example, as well. You know, who've been the big kind of influences, who the mentors that you've kind of looked up to?
I've got many mentors. So my parents, both my parents were from small towns and villages, and we come from quite a poor background. So being humble and being around the community, helping the community, has always been something that's been really important to me. But there are 1 or 2 people that certainly helped me on my journey that I wouldn't have started if it wasn't for them. So one is a guy called Jack Abrahams. I met him. Well, he's been a friend of the family for a very long time. I met him in synagogue during one of the Jewish festivals. He was working for a company called Server Warm at the time. I was 19. He then moved to Harp Heating. He got me an interview at the age of 19. And that's when I started my journey into heating and sales. And if I didn't start that, I certainly would have started on the journey to self-development, property, or anything else. So that was the first part. That was a tangent in my road that if I didn't have that then, I certainly would have started that journey. There's another guy when I started Sharp's Bedrooms who started the same day as me. His name was Martin Glick, who was the sales director, and he was just massive personality and character, all around about sales, laughter, fun, and he made selling and understanding, communicating with people a lot of fun. And then we have the obvious people, people like Tony Robbins. When I read his book, Awaken the Giant Within, that was a massive change for me mentally, to know what was possible. You know, when you're still a young guy, you're selling, and you read something that has so much information about knowledge and making small shifts, that small shifts, what can happen over a period of time. And then you've got people like Robert Kiyosaki, T. Harv Eker, all of those things to allow that progression, to understand about leverage, gearing, about your mindset, compounding. All of those things had a really big impact for me.
No, but certainly, obviously, Jack and Martin, obviously your parents, very much personal relationships of yours, and then, but I guess many of our listeners should have heard of or will have heard of Tony Robbins and Robert Kiyosaki, and you know, I personally have a lot of time for both of Tony and Robert's teachings, and I still remember very vividly the impact that Rich Dad Poor Dad had on me, which obviously was written by Robert Kiyosaki. And for those of you who are a younger audience, if you haven't consumed Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, or Unleash the Giant Within by Tony Robbins, who himself is a bit of a giant, isn't he? He's a larger than life character. Then yeah, I think you need to, those would be things that you want to put on your reading list pretty soon. I think we're pretty much out of time, Emmanuel. I just want to say thank you very much for your time. It's been absolutely fascinating. Obviously, we've known each other a while, but I have the utmost respect for everything you've achieved, and I'm very much looking forward to what's coming next. I mean, if you were to sort of paint a picture for the next sort of 5 years as to what you're looking to achieve and what you're looking to do, you know, what would you say the future looks like for you?
I think in terms of development, I still want to carry on developing 2 to 4 projects a year between new build and PD. PD is the preference at the moment. Having more balance between work and life, which I've been creating for the last maybe 5-10 years, really is the area that I'm at. I'm probably at the most happiest, comfortable place I've been for quite some time. So those are the 2 things in terms of work and life balance. And you probably didn't see, but I got engaged not so long ago. I did that in a style that most men hate me, most women love me for, the way that I actually did it. So I'm in a pretty good place with my relationship with my fiance Sharon. So it's pretty good.
Well, all I can say is congratulations to you and Sharon on your engagement. And I think when we first met, you were not long out of your previous marriage, and so I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased for you that you've been able to move on and find new love and new beginnings, I suppose. So congratulations, and it's lovely to hear that. The final question, as a closing tradition, if you were to give some advice or self-talk to your younger self, and you can pick, you know, where at your which younger self you'd like to give the advice to, what would you say to yourself and why?
Oh, that's a big question. So look, if I look back in my life and where I am now, it's really to know, or say, we tend to overestimate what we can do in 1 year and hugely underestimate what we can do in 10, 15, 20 years or more. And if you just look at improving yourself 1% per week over the course of the year, you've increased 52%. Over 10 years, that's 520%. And don't look backward, look forward. Always look forward. You can't go forward if you're looking in the rearview mirror. Just visualize where you want to be, keep working towards it, and one day you'll get there.
Brilliant advice. I absolutely love that, and hopefully, certainly something that I've learned. Like I say, I've learned, and I'll certainly be trying to apply that myself. And hopefully, all of our audience, whether young or less young, can take advantage of that too. Emmanuel, where can people find you? How can people get in touch with you, whether it's to talk about new development sites, whether they want to talk about funding or anything else, or maybe get hold of one of your books? What's the best way for someone to reach out to you?
The easiest place is LinkedIn, just Immanuel Ezekiel, or they can connect at broadwinghomes.co.uk. I'm also on all the normal social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and now TikTok as well. So yeah, they can contact me on any of those platforms.
Right, marvelous. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thanks to all of our audience for staying with us and enjoying this very fascinating and inspiring conversation. I've been Michael Dean, and I'm at _Property Funder, and that's as I said, if you'd like to block or mute me, that is the best place to find me. Emmanuel, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you in person again soon, and maybe with some weights attached to us as well. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great, you too. Thank you. Look forward to it.